Opening up this Agriculture Today, we'll glance once again to the grain market trends, and our guest has just put together his latest what-if analysis for the corn and wheat markets. Dan O'Brien joins us via phone now from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. He is, of course, Research and Extension grain market economist with the university. Dan, what you've done is you've taken both the corn and wheat trades and not only drawn from the latest USDA supply and demand numbers, but you've tossed in here some extra considerations for these markets to chew on. Starting with corn, what might those considerations be?
Well, I think you have to start first with what the USDA had projected of 170.7 bushels per acre, and use the results of the acreage report on June 30th, as is, without any adjustments for prevented planting or anything. Took those numbers straight out and came up with a yield figure, and then built the rest of their supply-demand balance sheet and their prices off of that. The August 10th report, as you and I have talked, Eric, is going to be awfully important because it'll be the first in-field enumeration of actual plot samples and survey of farmers that we actually get. So would not be surprised that 170.7 bushel per acre figure could end up and be higher than we actually end up seeing for the final U.S. corn yield. Hence, the production numbers, instead of being 14.2, 14.3, could be a lot closer to 13.8, 13.6. If we get a more trend line-ish type of yields, 165, 167 bushels per acre. And by the way, those are some of the numbers we're seeing from some respected private analysts. Landworth, groups like that have come out and talked in those areas. The USDA scenario that they presented with, again, production of 14.255 billion, ending stocks 2.325, then you're looking at a price of about $3.30. But if you start plugging in these lower yields, again, 165, 167, production closer to 13.6, 13.8 billion bushels, ending stocks below 2 billion, closer to something basically between 1.9 and 2, and you end up with prices at least moderately higher. Again, 355, 360 as an average instead of that USDA projection of 330. Really, the bigger issues, the possibility for greater moves would be if the drought conditions we're seeing in the northern plains and other crop maladies we've heard of in different areas, if they're widespread enough to bring the yields, below that mid 160 area to down to 160 or 150. And again, I think you'd have to see really intense heat and crop damage occur. But still, there's a chance of that happening. Probably a 10% chance of something in 150 to 160 range. Then you've got production down to 13.2, 12.3, 12.4 billion bushels in ending stocks. And then you're starting to get prices in the 380 to 420 area, et cetera.
It's been mentioned many times that the cure for low prices is low prices. So on the demand side for corn, you are seeing indications that we can move more product either through export channels or through domestic use, given the fact that it's a buyer's market right now.
Yes, our usage of corn is tremendous. And normally, university people aren't supposed to make, hyperbole-laden statements like that, but it's been tremendous. The USDA's projection was about 14.35 billion bushels. We were at basically 14.6 last year. We had never been above 13.7, 13.6, 13.5 in any previous year. So, yes, we have large supplies, but the low prices have really helped on the usage side to where we're in the neighborhood of 14.4, 14.6 billion bushels of corn usage. And that is great, and you remain at low prices as long as you don't have a short crop. But now we've got the demand base built on low prices, and we have cattle in the feedlots, we have grain ethanol plants running full bore, we have corn usage overseas going at a good pace because of relatively low prices. So what you have in a situation like that is, if you do come into a summer where you do shock the system and fall short by 1 or 2 billion bushels and start to really tighten up stocks, then you start to see prices really jump around.
Well, Dan, what wild cards are in play within your latest wheat market analysis here and the price probabilities that you've put together?
Well, you've got a lot of pessimism that's been affecting the wheat market for several years in a row that are starting to erode a little bit. I guess what I'm talking about is Again, we've seen on the supply side, on the production side, 3 or 4 years in a row of ratcheting back of total U.S. wheat acreage. Again, we have planted acreage numbers that are as low as we've seen since the early 1900s. To the north of us in the Hard Red Spring area, they're having major production problems. And again, normally, in the normal course of things, we take the higher protein Hard Red Spring supplies, mix them with lower protein Hard Red Winter wheat, and in some cases soft red, depending on what the millers are trying to make from those supplies, and again, be able to get the appropriate proteins. Well, now, again, up in that area, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and actually up into Canada area, where durum and Hard Red Spring are grown, we have, very, very serious drought and real questions about what type of crop we'll get out of those areas. So with that, we're looking at signals here of how that's affecting our market. And you look to the processor bids in Wichita, again, off the USDA Ag Marketing Service reports. These were from earlier this week. You're looking at protein premiums from 11% to 12% protein, basically seeing a 5 over futures bid for 11% protein, a 55 over bid for 12%, and a 95 over bid for 13. So at the processors, we're rewarding wheat with good protein, and I think that we can trace a lot of that back, no doubt, to high protein wheat supply risk that we're seeing up in the northern U.S. and Canadian areas. Again, we just not going to have the amount of higher protein spring wheat that we normally use to blend. So any wheat that we have around here that has decent protein, this would seem to be the year we'd find the reward of it.
Other than that, as you put together your potential price scenarios, it will take quite a bit of something to happen for wheat prices to get much above $5, will it not?
Yeah, really the big issue out there is this the year when dry conditions in various parts of the world, the other major growers actually have enough of an impact that the world is forced to come back to the United States with our relatively high currency and actually buy wheat from us. And there is that scenario out there where instead of the USDA's projection of 975 million bushels of exports, that through some combination of drought in Ukraine, which they have, dry conditions in Australia, which they have, if these places have enough challenges about them that the world has to come and buy from the U.S. Well, instead of 975 million, you're up to 1.2 billion, and we've been there in some of our better export years. If that comes into play, then instead of the USDA's projection of 480 per bushel for this 17-18 marketing year, a range of 440 to 520, we'd be looking at something closer to $6 wheat. What's the chance of that? There's still probably a 1 in 5 chance of that happening. But to what degree do people that have wheat now that they've just harvested, to what degree do they wait to see if that scenario comes about? To be objective, it's probably a 1 in 5 chance that could happen. There are other things that could come about. The USDA's projection of 46.2 is down markedly from what we'd seen in earlier months, down from 52.6 last year for yields. And if we come in at more of a 5-year average yield, and again, it's a roll of the dice right now, we really don't know how badly damaged that crop up to the north is. So if we get a 5-year average yield or they have a real washout up to the north, well, then we start looking at lower production. Prices are closer, instead of 480, 505, 535, something like that.
We are due a renewed look at the basis levels around Kansas, and you've picked out 2 points in the state to consider here, and whether those levels, particularly for wheat, but maybe across the board, are moving more toward the producer favor.
Well, for corn, if you look at the key locations that we tend to watch representing east and west, Salina on the one hand, Garden City on the other, corn basis in the Salina area, sideways to, in recent weeks, just a hair lower. Out in Garden City for corn, basis bids continue to steadily improve, getting closer to even. And grain sorghum basis in Salina, it's actually been sideways to improving. Had been really good in the spring area, it's fallen back off, and now is holding steady to improving again for this year. For the Garden City area also, good grain sorghum basis movement relative to where it had been coming out of the late winter into early spring by about 40 to 50 cents. Sideways to slightly lower here in recent weeks. For wheat, we were running tremendous in terms of the improvement we were seeing in wheat basis in these Salina and Garden City locations until about 1 or 2 weeks ago, and then started to see basis weaken, particularly in the Salina area. Garden City area, somewhat, not as much weakening as in the Salina locations. For soybeans, continuing their trend, just very, very steady basis from the first of the year on in both the Salina and Garden City locations we've been watching. It doesn't look like we'll see a lot of change in basis bids in either the Salina, Garden City, or the broader Kansas area for beans.
Dan, thanks as always, and we'll be back with you next Friday.
Thank you, Eric. Take care.
He is Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today. Of course, at the forefront, regularly if not daily, the status of U.S. trade policy, and agriculture has a huge stake in that, as you know. We wanted to tap the thoughts of an agricultural economist here at K-State who's very well attuned to international trade matters, Vincent Amanor-Boadu, and his observations of where we're at, where we may be going with our trade approaches in the U.S., particularly with respect to agriculture. But Vincent, in the last 6 months with the new administration in place, the tone of U.S. trade policy comments seems to have changed a bit. How do you read all this?
Well, I think there are 2 things that we have to be cognizant of, Eric. During the campaign, we heard a lot about how trade has been bad for the United States. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was based on trade deficit situation without actually looking at the total separation of industries and also on exports and imports, because they have different effects. Exports are good for producers, for sellers. Imports are good for consumers, and those 2 are not necessarily the same. So when you look at the balance of your trade, your export trade, and you say it's negative, and that drives how you are going to deal with your trade policy, you are either going to reward one group and punish the other, and neither is going to be good for you, because when you put trade barriers up, you are punishing your exporters, and you are also punishing your consumers. And that is why, in general, opening borders and allowing goods to flow has always been a good thing, regardless of how we look at it. So what we really need is certainty in the policy environment, and also confidence that, people can make investment decisions and expect the environment to sustain the assumptions under which they make those decisions.
That said, the agricultural community, as you well know, has been somewhat concerned, if not outright fearful, about the prospect of reopening and renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement. That's been center stage for some time now. The administration is moving in that direction. There have been some statements as to the points of renegotiation that might be taken up. Where are we with NAFTA? And moreover, does agriculture have a lot to fear here?
Well, we haven't moved much. I mean, there's been a lot more talk than action. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot more talk probably here at home than between us and our partners. But what we know is that the Canadians and the Mexicans are prepping for not necessarily renegotiating, because remember that right now the global market space, the U.S. in that space is just one country. Both Mexico and Canada are very large trade partners for the United States. and vice versa. The critical thing is, what are they going to do if they don't like the agreement in place or the agreement that we are looking at bringing up? They have a broader market, right? And that is the thinking that is going on when you talk to the Canadians and the Mexicans. Mm-hmm. They are looking at entering alternative markets and building those relationships without putting their confidence in the United States as a market. So then that means that for our exports, right, because it's going to be bilateral. So if they are looking for alternative markets, it means that whatever that barriers we are putting in place, and that's the interesting thing in trade, what is good for the goose is always good for the gander. So when you put a barrier in place and say, I don't want this, it automatically flips and says, okay, then you won't do the same thing, right? So we have to look at our trade and say, okay, where is U.S., at least Kansas farm products going? And how is any change that we think is going to benefit the automobile industry or benefit the air conditioning industry, how is that going to translate in its effect on agriculture?
Is there relevance from those non-agricultural goods that might spill over and impact agriculture?
Exactly. Because when you start trying to balance trade, it means that the winners have to give up part of their wins to support the losers. And I put those in quotes because American consumers are saying, we like these products from this particular place better than we like the ones that we are making here. And that is why imports are coming in, right? And foreign consumers are saying, we like American food products better, and that's why they are importing our products. So when you look at the balance and you say, well, German cars are coming into the United States and a Mercedes is more expensive than wheat. So if the balance is not adding up and you are going to try and prevent German cars from coming, and in the process, Germans prevent wheat from going out, then it means that wheat farmers are now are being made to subsidize the inefficiencies in the luxury market of the United States. That is something that I think, agriculture should be worried about because so far we have been okay, in our trade balance situation because we are the most efficient. And to make us support the inefficiencies of other industries because we are looking at the total sum and the net situation, I think is punishing agriculture, and we shouldn't take that.
More broadly, there's been, again, some debate and discussion over the posture of bilateral trade agreements versus multilateral trade agreements, whether or not agriculture benefits with bilateral vis-a-vis multilateral agreements. That's very much at the core of this as well, isn't it?
Yes, and we have to be careful because, multilateral is multiple bilaterals. That's what it is. So let's take the situation we have right now where Japan has agreements with Australia, right, that are more favorable than the agreement with us. Okay, so the Australians can land their beef and their wines in Japan with lower tariff rates than we can. In a multilateral arrangement, we get the best of the most favored nation treatment, right? So the challenge here is we can do as many bilateral arrangements as we want. The cost of managing those agreements are high because you are doing one-on-one over and over and over again, and you are negotiating the same thing with a number of people, and the conditions are different, and somebody wants this and somebody doesn't want that. And in the end, when it comes to any product, we are competing with everybody else. Right? So in the case that we are looking at where Australia has been able to negotiate a better arrangement with Japan on beef than we have, then what happens is U.S. beef is entering Japan with a higher tariff than Australian beef. The Japanese consumer is looking at the beef and saying, this one is more expensive than that one. I can't see the difference, and therefore I'm buying the cheaper one. That's the risk of getting into these bilateral agreements because you are trading specific products in your agreements instead of having more like an overall perspective and balancing things together. So if we are, if negotiating with Japan and Japan is looking at the automobile market, we are going to sacrifice some other market in favor of the automobile market. But Japan is a very important agricultural market for us. Mm-hmm. So in order to get a better deal with Japan, you have technically used agriculture as a scapegoat. And those are my concerns about bilateral arrangements, because you cannot get the best agreement that allows you to get the most favored treatment across all your trade treatments. And you'll be competing. Regardless of what agreement you have in place, you'll be competing with everybody else in any of the markets that you go in.
So, in conclusion, before we could talk many, many more angles here, your feeling and sense of the situation at hand. There was considerable worry several months ago about the policy direction. Is that same concern still in play?
I think it is. And the only, the advice that I will sort of present to negotiators and all that is the fallacy of using net trade as the metric of measurement. And in all fairness, a lot of these agreements that we are looking at changing have been negotiated by people who actually are no less patriotic and understood the issues. We know for sure that our partners don't like certain parts of the agreement. So all of a sudden, everything is up for grabs. And who is going to pay for that uncertainty? And that's the concern that I worry about for Kansas agriculture and food industries, because we depend so much on exports. I don't want a situation where agriculture and food is sacrificed for another part of the economy.
Well stated. And this will be very much on the front burner for months, if not years, it would appear. The state of agricultural trade and how current policy approaches might affect our trade successes. And Vincent, as always, we appreciate your comments and your insight. Thank you for coming over.
Thank you, Eric.
Agricultural economist, Kansas State University, Vincent Amanor-Boadu has been our guest on this part of Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Now to today's agricultural news headlines for you. These courtesy in part of DTN. President Trump has announced his intention to nominate Ted McKinney as Agriculture Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs and Sam Clovis as Agriculture Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics. The White House also said that the president's previously announced nomination of Steve Censky to be Agriculture Deputy Secretary has been sent to the Senate. Censky is the CEO of the American Soybean Association. Now, all three of these positions do require Senate confirmation. Censky and McKinney are likely to be confirmed easily, but the Clovis nomination could face challenges. McKinney is the director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, serving in that capacity since 2014. Clovis is the senior White House advisor to Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. Most recently, he served as chief policy advisor and national co-chair of the Trump-Pence campaign. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue praised both nominations. However, Clovis' nomination is expected to be controversial because he does not have a scientific background or an advanced degree in science, and the undersecretary position he would hold is also expected to be the USDA chief scientist. Senate Agriculture Committee ranking member Debbie Stabenow issued a statement responding to the announcement of these nominations, saying that while Sinski and McKinney are experienced candidates and could serve easily in USDA leadership roles, quoting Stabenow, I have strong concerns that Sam Clovis is not qualified to be USDA Undersecretary of Research, Education, and Economics, which dually serves as the department's chief scientist. She went on to say that this nominee seems to lack the necessary agricultural science and research qualifications that are required by the Farm Bill. Further, Stabenow said, quoting here, I also have many questions about the views of his on providing public investment in crop insurance and education. As was mentioned in our conversation with K-State's Vincent Amanor-Boadu just a bit back, next month, negotiators for the North American Free Trade Agreement member nations will convene opening talks to modernize the trade deal. Here's a look at that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Agriculture has done pretty well under NAFTA, and that's true in a variety of different agricultural products, and we have to be careful not to lose what we gained.
U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer at a Senate confirmation hearing in May, talking about renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Since that hearing, USTR has conducted public hearings on
do no harm to agriculture when other industry chapters are modernized, and do no harm to NAFTA,
and released U.S. objectives regarding renegotiation of NAFTA with Canada and Mexico, including feedback like that offered from Chandler Gould of the National Association of Wheat Growers. Now USTR has announced arrangements and a time frame for the first round of NAFTA renegotiations, scheduled to take place starting August 16th in Washington, D.C. Also announced the appointment of Assistant Trade Representative John Milley as the chief negotiator for the NAFTA talks. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also on the trade front, 7 Chinese soybean buyers have signed agreements to buy 12.5 million metric tons, that's about 460 million bushels of 2017-18 U.S. soybeans. That would be the second largest deal after the 2015 agreement. This is a deal of $5 billion U.S., according to the China country director of the U.S. Soybean Export Council, Xiaoping Zhang. China imported about 2.4 billion bushels of 17 crop soybeans so far. According to China market estimates, there will be more than 870 million bushels of beans on their way to China in the following 3 months. Well, a native of Emporia, Kansas, and former administrator of the International Grains Program here at K-State, has just been named to a major leadership post with the nation's primary wheat marketing agency. Jordan Hildebrand has the story on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop.
U.S. Wheat Associates announced a change to its senior staff, naming Mark Fowler as the new Vice President of Overseas Operations, following the transition of Vince Peterson to President on July 1st. In this role, Fowler will be responsible for providing program and personnel direction to U.S. Wheat's 15 overseas offices, as well as technical and marketing guidance in support of U.S. Wheat's trade servicing activities. U.S. Wheat is the industry's export market development organization, representing the interests of U.S. wheat farmers in more than 100 countries. Fowler said, "My first memories growing up in a farming family were riding with my grandfather to the grain elevator with a load of wheat. I am honored to be selected to serve U.S. wheat producers and support the mission of U.S. Wheat Associates." Fowler is no stranger to the international milling and wheat industries. He earned a bachelor's degree in milling science and management from Kansas State University and later returned to complete a master's degree in agricultural economics. His career began as a miller first for Cargill and then Seaboard. In those roles, Fowler ran flour mills, worked on projects in several developing countries, and also worked as a technical director for the Africa division within Seaboard's overseas group in South Africa. Later, Fowler spent 12 years back at Kansas State University as a milling specialist and associate director with the IGP Institute and the university's Grain Science and Industry Department. Peterson said, "U.S. Wheat has worked closely with Mark over over the years in his various capacities in milling, education, training, and customer consultation work. He clearly distinguished himself by the quality of his work, as well as his energy and enthusiasm for the international milling industry. Mark is a longtime friend to our industry, but in recent months, I have had the opportunity to get to know him on a deeper business level and learn how well he is respected as a manager, executive, and leader by the people that he has worked with. Over the last decade, Fowler has also been a technical milling consultant for U.S. Wheat, as well as the Northern Crops Institute, allowing him to become well acquainted with many U.S. Wheat staff and overseas customers. Fowler said, "Throughout my career, I have experienced the global impact of the milling industry from several perspectives. I am excited to engage with friends and colleagues in the industry to advance the U.S. Wheat export market development mission." Most recently, Fowler was the president and CEO of Farmer Direct Foods, a farmer-owned flour milling company in New Cambria, Kansas. In this role, Fowler gained critical senior management and executive experience, which Peterson says demonstrates that Fowler has the leadership and capabilities to manage U.S. Wheat's overseas operations. U.S. Wheat's mission is to develop, maintain, and expand international markets to enhance the profitability of U.S. wheat producers and their customers. Its activities are made possible by producer checkoff dollars managed by 18 state wheat commissions and through the cost share funding provided by USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. For more information, please visit www.uswheat.org. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Jordan Hildebrand.
Thanks, Jordan. And this is Agriculture Today.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
This Agriculture Today closes out on Kansas agricultural weather. We get the latest from the Weather Data Library here at K-State and Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. Hot weather dominated this past week, Mary, and it's uncomfortable, no question about it. It's causing crop stress, livestock stress, but this is not atypical for a Kansas July.
No, it isn't unusual for Kansas in July, but that, as you noted, doesn't make it any easier to get through. Right. We will mention that we've had our anniversary of the hottest temperature ever recorded. July 18th, we hit 121 degrees near Fredonia. We've got another anniversary on the 24th where it hit again 121 degrees near Alton, Kansas.
That was back in the 30s now, right?
Both of those occurred in July of 1936. And one of the things that's kind of astonishing about that is not the warmest July on record. 1980 and 1934 both beat out that 1936 for the hottest July. So we have been hotter. Again, it doesn't make it any more comfortable to get through with the current conditions.
And some relief is apparently on its way. On the moisture side, there were plenty of places where nothing was received, but on the other hand, especially in parts of western Kansas, some decent moisture did occur this past week.
Right. We look at the week ending on Tuesday because that is what goes into the U.S. Drought Monitor. And looking at that week, the 11th through the 18th, southwest and west central Kansas both saw very generous rainfall. The southwest averaged 1.27 inches, which is more than double what they would normally see during the week. The west central averaged 89/100 of an inch, and that also was above normal, 1 1/4 times what they would normally see during the period. The rest of the divisions were all below what we would typically see in July, and the Northeast was the one that really fell behind on it. We averaged 21/100 of an inch, and that is 20% of normal. And that was kind of a mixed blessing. At least it was rain. We got something. Last week we had nothing at all. But The biggest impact from that was to crank up the humidity levels, which we're seeing with those dew points in the upper 70s, low 80s. So you get a very oppressive heat during the day. Heat indices are up there running in the 108. They're expecting maybe 111 over the day-to-day. Very stressful for livestock and for humans as well.
All of this is being reflected in the latest drought monitor, Mary?
We're seeing a little bit of it in the latest drought monitor. We had some switch in where the abnormally dry conditions were, carved away some of it in the western divisions where they had that rain, but into central Kansas and north central Kansas and northeastern Kansas, there's been an expansion of that abnormally dry. We also, for the first time in a while, have reintroduced moderate drought to the state, and that is concentrated in north central, central, and parts of northeastern Kansas, southern Riley County, southern Geary County, moving over into Ottawa County and in those areas. And that map is available on our drought update, which is on the climate page. You can follow that for drought, and we do a weekly drought update that encapsulates all of these statistics and reports.
All right, well, we've slogged through the heat, and for too many people, the dryness the last several days. Is relief on the way with this cold front poised to roll through?
We'll see a little bit of a break from that. The question will be where those storms develop, how much of it comes through. The quantitative precip forecast actually has some areas of north central and northeastern Kansas receiving over 1.25 inches out of this system, which would be very welcome. But that is the forecast and not necessarily the actual measurement, so we'll see what comes from that. It was interesting to note last night I was out running errands and saw a really big, nice thunderhead that was raining in Nebraska, which didn't really get much for us. When we look a little bit further, they've released the August outlook because we're almost into August now. Not any encouraging word on the temperature. That is still trending towards warmer than normal. Doesn't necessarily mean quite the excessive temperatures that we've seen in these last couple of weeks, but it is there. The precip is neutral. It's equally likely to be above or below normal. We are noting that they are calling for wetter than normal to our south. The desert southwest, that monsoon has kicked in, is very active, so we should see some possibilities from that. Also, into Texas and eastern Oklahoma, they have wetter than normal conditions that cover most of that of Oklahoma and actually brush across southeastern Kansas. Again, encouraging if we can get some of that Gulf moisture moving in, that could provide something for these systems, these cold fronts, to actually work with. To this point, it's not really been, despite all of the humidity in the air, it's not really moistened the entire column of the atmosphere. So we get clouds, we get a few drops, but we don't get productive rainfall.
And lastly, you tell us the fall outlook has been posted, and in essence, it echoes that of the August forecast.
Right. There's a little bit less chance for that warmer than normal pattern, although it's still there, but equal chances on the moisture. And again, what we're really hoping is we don't have a repeat of last fall where we had the very dry conditions after a very wet summer, particularly in western Kansas. We don't need a repeat of that. One encouraging note on that is that last fall we were coming off a La Nina, which tends to favor hot, dry conditions. At this point, we're neutral. The expectation is that we'll remain neutral through the fall and into the winter of 2017-2018. There is still a slight possibility for an El Nino, which favors wetter conditions for us, but not much chance that the La Nina will raise its face at this point. So, again, that takes one of those weights off the scale towards that dry pattern.
That remains very positive news. Mary, appreciate the time and the input, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension, on Kansas agricultural weather and rounding out our Friday edition. Our thanks to you for being along with us, and do enjoy your weekend as well. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.